המלצות של גדולי הרבנים בירושלים שממליצים בחוק והוראתם אפשר לתרום גם מכספי מעשר. תנסו וניסו בשפע ברכה והצלחה.
Amen. Amen. Chazak, okay, let's do a halacha quick. Someone asked me a question this week, and I figured it might be good for the Hamon Am, to everybody. And so the question is as follows. This person, he's not here now. He and his wife, they have separate beds in their room, but there's not a lot of room to split the beds. So the beds are touching each other, the two beds. And he wants to know if that's okay when she's nida or he has to go on the couch. And so Acham Ovadia does talk about this. And so it actually works out because the source for this all has to do with Eliyahu and Navi, which always starts to works itself out this way. And so Acham Ovadia, he starts with the Gemara on Shabbat. Says the Gemara on Shabbat. Gemara Shabbat. Now this is going to sound a little tough, so get ready. Says the Gemara, Tashima, Eleharim lo achal. Someone, this is Yechezkel talking. Someone who doesn't eat the mountains, which means, according to Rashi, he doesn't use up zechut avot. He's a good guy. This is a tzaddik. He doesn't need the zechut of the horim, of the parents. Ve'enav lo nasai el gilulei bet Yisrael. He doesn't have anything to do with avodah zarah. Ve'et eshet re'ehu lo timeh. He never does adultery with his wife, with his friend's wife. Ve'elisha nida lo yikrab, and he doesn't come close to a nida. Come close. Also in the Torah it says, Ve'elisha b'nidat tumata lo tikrav legalot irvata. With a woman who's nida, you cannot even get close. That's why we have all these strict halachot regarding nida. It's not just the act of relations. Says the Gemara, Ma eshet re'ehu hu bevigdo v'hi bevigda asu. Just like for your friend's wife, you would never say that if she's lying in the bed with her pajamas and you're lying in the same bed with your pajamas, that's okay. No one would ever say this with their friend's wife. Of course, you cannot lie with your friend's wife in bed, fully clothed. Af ishto nida. So too, the next words in the pasuk, which is a nida, must be the same halacha. Hu bevigdo v'hi bevigda asud. If wife is in pajamas and you're in pajamas, fully clothed in the same bed, it would be asud. Shmuel and I will learn from here that laying down in bed with your wife who's a nida cannot be. It's not allowed, whether clothing is on or off. So this is the source for the bed halacha. Now the Gemara adds a little piece at the end, and this is the interesting part. Tana de Eliyahu, we learned in the yeshiva of Eliyahu, which the Chida holds is actually Eliyahu and Avi. Some disagree. Tana de Eliyahu, and the story actually makes sense that it would be Eliyahu and Avi. So let's go with that. Ma'aseh b'talmidei had. Now this is going to be tough. This is going to be very tough. I'm telling you right now. There was a story with one student. Sheshana harbe. He learned a lot of Mishnah. Ve'kara harbe, and he learned a lot of Torah. V'shemesh talmidei hachamim harbe. That's what Rabbi Adar was talking about Friday night. He served talmidei hachamim. He was like an all-star. This guy. Umet b'hasiyamav, and he died half of his age. He died young. V'hayita ishto notel tefillin. His wife took his tefillin of her dead husband. She used to walk around to all the shuls and all the Beit Midrash, holding her husband, her deceased husband's tefillin. And she would tell everybody, it says in the Torah that it gives you long life. My husband, who studied a ton of Torah and a ton of Mikra and a ton of Mishnah, and he even served Talmidei Hakamim. Why would he die at a young age? And so this woman walked around crying, blaming everybody. No one can answer her anything. Says Eliyahu Hanavi, one time I visited her, and she kept this whole speech that she always told everybody. She was telling me, my husband was a big rabbi, my husband did this, my husband did that, and he died so young. I said to her, what did he do when you were nida regarding the bedroom? She said to me, Has v'shalom. He never even touched my pinky when I was nida, when the actual flowing. So he says to her, Bimen levunech mahu etzlech. Yeah, but the whole 2 week period in the counting clean days of the white days, all the days of Nidah until the mikvah, how was the bedroom arranged? She says to him, Achal imi, he ate with me, Vishata imi, drank with me, Vyashan imi bikiru basad, and we slept together, not fully clothed. So, but they didn't have relations. Velo aleta da'ato al davar ahed. He never even considered that we should have relations during the Nidah period. But after the first 5 or 6 or 7 days, in the next week, he slept in the same bed with me. Ve'amati la, Eliyahu Navi says, I told her, sorry, Baruch Kanai, Baruch hamakom sheharego. Baruch Hashem that he killed him. Shelo nasa panim la Torah. So you shouldn't show favoritism in the Torah. It's very strong stuff. Shaarey Amra Torah, because the Torah says, Ve'elisha b'nidat tumata lo tikrav. When a woman is a nidah, you cannot come close to her even. Now, here's the last piece. Ki atad Avdimi, when Avdimi came from Israel, from Israel to Babel, he said, this story, we're missing one fact in the story. And this little line from Ravdimi, thank you very much, is the whole point. Ravdimi says, Mita hadahavai. It was one bed. They only had one bed in the room. So it wasn't even that they were sleeping maybe together or even touching each other, or pajamas could have been on, but they had one bed. Now the second part, Amar Rabbi Ishaq bar Yosef, Rabbi Ishaq bar Yosef says, Sinad mafsik bin olavina. She wore like shorts, that she says, short pants. And therefore it was a big bed and she wore short pants. Because of this Gemara, you have a whole subject about if someone has a very large, big, I don't know what's bigger than a king bed. California king, bigger than that. If someone has a very, very big bed and he's not going to even come near his wife, are they allowed to have one bed? So the Beit Yosef talks about this back and forth. All the Rishonim dispute this because of this Gemara. Some of the Rishonim hold that it doesn't matter how big the bed is. It could be like the most gigantic bed in the history of the world. If it's one bed, it's not allowed. Most of the Rishonim and Moran Beit Yosef himself seems to say the Ikar halacha is that if the bed is so big that they're separate blankets, definitely has to be separate blankets. You can never share the same blanket. It doesn't matter if it's a football field bed. It's same blanket, no. But if there's separate blankets and the blankets will never touch each other, your blanket will never touch her blanket, and that bed is so big, he says, Me'ikat hadin, it's probably okay. From the letter of the law, it's probably okay, but the minhag is not to do it. With this background, we'll finish the halacha from Chacham. Says the Chacham Ovadia, Asur lishan im or lishkav im ishto nida b'mita achat. You cannot sleep with your wife, lay down with your wife in one bed when she's nida. Even if it's not your bed or her bed, it's a shared bed. Even if you're both wearing pajamas, you're not touching each other. Even a very, very big bed. And everyone's got their own sheets and their own blankets. You can't do it. And on the bottom of the comments, he writes, but if it's an absolutely gigantic bed, maybe there's a leniency. And on the top, he doesn't write it. ויש להחמיר גם בשתי מיטות הנוגעות זו בזו. מיטות הנוגעות זו בזו. You should be strict also if the two beds are touching each other. יש להחמיר. It doesn't say it's asur. יש להחמיר means it should be strict. אלא אם כן יפרידו המיטות שיהיה רווח כלשהו ביניהן. Some of the Ashkenazi poskim, they write that there has to be a separation of the bed. Number one, the bed sheets and the bed spreads, the blankets cannot touch each other. And some of the Ashkenazim write that if in the middle of the night you were to, do the arm over the bed move, your arm goes over the bed, and she puts her arm over her bed, if there's a chance that you're close enough that you can touch, it's too close to the beds, and it don't have to be further. But so says the Chacham Ovadia, this is the Ashkenazi perspective. So Maran Beit Yosef doesn't hold this. He says his words is afilu, he says, if there's revach kol shehu, even a crack, a tiny bit of space, and Chacham Ovadia writes in the bottom that you shouldn't be hoshesh. You don't have to be hoshesh for your arm sticking out in the middle of your sleep and her arm sticking out in the middle of the sleep. It's too much already to be hoshesh for this. So revach kol shehu would be allowed. He says, Im hamitot mufradot zumizu. If the beds are separate, mutar lishan alehem keshu b'mitato v'hi b'mitata. You can sleep on them. Af alpi sheyesh kila pirusa me'alehem. If you have a canopy spread over the whole bed thing, umakifa me'al hod echetei mitot, and it's surrounding all the two beds. So it's kind of two beds are together, surrounded by one canopy. It looks like it's one bed, but there's a little bit of a crack in between. You don't have to have an actual mechitza in the middle of the beds. You cannot have one blanket to share in the two beds. It doesn't matter how big the blanket is, you cannot have one blanket. Acham Vadia on the bottom, he writes, Manan Bet Yosef holds that Mi'ikad Hadin, the beds touching each other is kosher. Mi'ikad Hadin. And his Lashon is, the way he finishes over here, Lashon is Tov li'zahed. Tov li'zahed. It's good to be strict. The exact Lashon he writes is Tov le'ahmid abal lo lehorot. Says Achadia. You should be strict for yourself. That it should be further away if possible. That nothing could ever touch each other. But if someone asks you the halacha lehorot, you have to say the halacha ma'aseh. So the halacha ma'aseh is if the beds are touching each other, the bed frames are touching each other. Some poskim on the bottom also he writes, they say these days the beds are different than the old days. These days we have bed frames. The mattresses never, if you have two beds next to each other, the mattresses are not touching. It's the wood of the ice of the bed frame. So to be mahmid and say the two bed frames can't even touch each other is very, very mahmid. It's tov le'ahmid. It's good to be mahmid. But if someone doesn't have enough room, or this guy who texted me, he says you have that has those two special beds, like they have different angles, they're custom built, and you can't separate them. They're like made this way. I said, just make sure you have your own blankets. She has her own blankets. Your beds are technically two separate beds. If you can have a half of an inch in between, it is allowed. So again, one more time, it's going to be more lenient for the Sfaradim than Ashkenazim over here. He says, you cannot sleep in one bed. Even it's very giant. No. Someone says, I have a very giant bed, you shouldn't do it. You should be strict. You should be strict. There's two beds touching each other, unless you could put revah kol shehu. So a little bit of a crack in between would be halacha ma'ateh. This is what it writes in Tarat HaMishpacha, and this is what I told the guy. I told the guy, make sure you have two separate sheets and blankets that cannot touch each other. A little crack, it'll be good. Rabbi Dado, Maskim? He did. Yeah. Yeah, I got a photo and all that. That's the halacha l'maaseh. But we learn anyway from this Gemara, if someone over here actually has one bed in the room, you see this Gemara, it's not the Eliyahu Navi, not good, guys. Not good. Get rid of the king bed and get two twin beds. But we have to have two separate beds, not one bed. Doesn't matter if you're young or old. Baruch Hanan Amen. We have Kaddish. Doesn't matter. Say, oh, my wife is old.